Who was Charles Martel d'Anjou, and why should we care? Welcome back everyone to this Divine Comedy series, 100 videos for 100 cantos. Today the challenge is to talk about Canto 8 of Paradiso. Beautiful canto, rich in meanings, rich in history, and it's a canto that revolves around a unique and particular historic figure, the historic figure of Charles Martel d'Anjou, not Charles Martel from Charlemagne from the 7th and 8th century, but Charles Martel of the House of Anjou, who is somebody who died young at 24 and whom Dante actually met in person and had a chance to meet during his life. Canto 8 and Canto 9 of Paradiso are together the cantos of Venus, of the heaven of Venus. And in all the three canticles of the Divine Comedy, Canto 10 is generally a new beginning, entering into an ulterior dimension. This is how Dante wanted the comedy to work. So we have these two cantos where Dante will be in the heaven of Venus, and then something new and beyond will start with Canto 10. Also, when we think about Venus, it was believed to have two different types of influxes in Dante's times, and before as well, probably linked to the fact that Venus was visible two times during the day, once in the morning and once in the evening. So there was this type of double identity or double nature about Venus as a star that impacts people's lives. The first type of influx was positive, was good in terms of civil harmony from a society and political standpoint. The second type of influx was seen from a negative point of view and is the type of influx that was letting reason be overcome by the passions of love. Therefore, in the next canto, Canto 9, we're going to see the characters of the repentant lovers. What is Canto 8 about? From a high level, we can say that it's the first canto of Venus. Dante is ascending to the sphere, the third sphere, or third heaven, which is the heaven of Venus. There is an explanation around the name of Venus, of the planet of Venus. There is an encounter with the soul of Charles Martel d'Anjou. This soul will speak to Dante, especially about the relationships between fathers and sons, and civic duty, and the loving others that is involved in politics, in good politics. And finally, he will touch on the topic of human differences and how we need to respect everyone's differences because they are wanted by the divine providence. This is basically all the canto is about from a really, really high level. But as always, once we start looking closer to the tercets, there is much, much more. So if we start here from the Italian side, and I'm reading again from the Mandelbaum translation, Dante says, solea creder lo mondo in suo pericolo, che la bella ciprigna il folle amore raggiasse, volta nel terzo epiciclo. La bella ciprigna, this is Venus. Venus, the goddess, because she was believed to be born in Cyprus. That's why Cyprian as a name that was the ancient name for Venus. Il folle amore, this is a technical term that comes from Provençal poetry. It was a technical term to define that love of the senses, the passionate love in Provençal poetry, and therefore not the soul type of love or platonic type of love. This was and this is why Dante uses it here, because that's the type of love that Venus stands for. Raggiasse, volta nel terzo epiciclo. What is this epiciclo or epicycle in Mandelbaum translation? Well, ancient astronomy in Dante's times was very much based on Aristotle and also Ptolemy. So there are some echoes of Ptolemaic astronomy here. Because the Earth was at the center of everything and all the planets were kind of going in circles around it, Ptolemy already, and then others, had realized that the calculation didn't really result appropriately when you calculated them as pure circles. Therefore, they had devised this type of mathematical tools. An epicycle would refer to the rotation of a planet around a point on its circumference. This is what had been devised by Ptolemy and these ancient astronomers. And this is why there is a concept that is slightly different from a simple circle. Perché non pura lei faceano onore di sacrificio e di votivo grido, le genti antiche nell'antico errore. This antico errore is the ancient mistake, the ancient errore, because the pagan gods were the error. For Dante, in fact, the influx of Venus and the influx of the heaven of Venus is still present in people's lives, only it's willed by God, and it's part of the Christian doctrine. It's not anymore willed by the pagan gods. And then he says something very important at verse 10. He says, ed a costei ond'io principio pigliavano il vocabolo della stella. Il vocabolo della stella means the term, the word for the star, for the planet, which is Venus. It comes from these people. Pigliavano means they took the verb for the stars. Da costei, that from this goddess, ond'io principio piglio. This is very important for Dante's own history, because it's a very interesting expression that is translated by Mandelbaum as and gave the name of her with whom I have begun this canto. However, it may have an ambiguous meaning. It may have a double meaning, in fact. Not only this is the name that I begin this particular canto with, which is fairly clear, but also when Dante says principio piglio, it could mean something much more general about his own biography, his own story as a man. So it could be referring to his own spiritual awakening through Beatrice, through the love that from Beatrice awoke his own spiritual journey. And when he says che il sol vagheggia or da coppa or da ciglio, this is a really elegant way for Dante to refer to this characteristic of Venus, of being visible in the morning and also in the evening. He says or da coppa or da ciglio. Coppa means the nape, and ciglio is the brow. So sometimes from behind, sometimes from the front, in the morning and in the evening. And again, with this kind of double type of influx, one good and one bad. Here is one of the most striking tercets of the whole canto, where Dante at verse 13, he says, io non m'accorsi del salire in ella, ma d'esservi entro mi fe assai fede. La donna mia, chi vidi far più bella. It's a quick tercet, but we understand from this that even if Dante is doing a corporeal journey, he's there with his own body, this ascension that he's having from the previous heaven to the heaven of Venus is something mainly spiritual, because he doesn't feel it. He doesn't feel a sense of gravity or a sense of moving. He just finds himself there. So it's really a perfect way to represent the fact that all this journey at this point in particular in Paradiso is happening inside of Dante's soul, behind his eyes in a sense. And this is why his own eyes, his own way to see things and the light of things and people in particular, the souls, keeps changing and keeps growing. Let's not forget that Beatrice is the mirror for Dante's soul. All throughout Paradiso and really all throughout the Divine Comedy, she is his soul's mirror. And this type of transposition of whatever happens inside of his heart into the luminosity of her face is the genius invention around which rotates the entire Paradiso, because we can see the progress that he's going through in Paradiso, not in the fact that he's climbing somewhere or like in purgatory or anything like that, but in the actual luminosity of Beatrice's face. With verse 16, we have Dante giving free rein to his stunning visual imagination. And in fact, here is he is saying: E come in fiamma favilla si vede, e come in voce voce si discerne, quand'una è ferma e altra va e riede, vidio in essa luce altre lucerne. He is repeating this. It's a genius double comparison that he's doing here. Mandelbaum translates, and just as in a flame a spark is seen, and as in plain song voice in voice is heard, one holds the note, the other comes and goes, I saw in that light other willing lamps. So for every heaven, Dante decides to stop within the planet of the heaven. So we are actually within Venus at this point, and it's already a luminous body. So we are surrounded by light, but just like within a fire, there is more light that you can see as a little spark of light. Just like that, or just like in a choir, you have a voice that makes a harmony. These are such lovely and delightful comparisons that is Dante at the height of his powers, really. He sees all these souls moving together extremely quickly, extremely fast. Let's remember the Latinism festini at verse 23. He uses tanto festini because festinus is Latin, it means fast, really, really quick. Che non paressero impediti. He's being approached by a lot of luminous souls. And he mentions the seraphim, who are the angels up in Empyreum. So the souls are actually coming to greet him, in a sense, from Empyreum, where they generally are. In fact, this is how Mandelbaum translates. Those spirits had begun within the heaven of high seraphim. They halted the circling dance they were doing in Empyreum to come and visit him and to be happy to talk to him. So we have one of these souls who approaches Dante, and this soul is Charles Martel. I want to show you the representation of this scene in the art of Moebius, who is a great comic book artist, in fact. You might have heard his name before. This is a Paradiso copy in Italian that is illustrated by Moebius, and this is his own representation of the scene of Charles Martel. I love how abstract, a little bit maybe surreal it is, with this Charles Martel with almost no face, and Dante and Beatrice in the background. Who was Charles Martel, and why should we care about who Charles Martel was? Especially Charles Martel d'Anjou, who was a contemporary of Dante. So he was part of the Anjou house, so part of the French dynasty of the Anjou, son of Charles II, whom Dante has already mentioned in the famous Canto 20 of Purgatorio, that canto where he talked about history, and he mentioned at least 4 of the French kings and how bad they were as kings, including Charles II, who is Charles Martel's father. In fact, Dante doesn't have a lot of good to say about anybody in the Anjou dynasty except for Charles Martel. He actually met with Charles Martel in person in 1294 when Charles Martel d'Anjou was passing through Florence with all of his court, and probably Dante and Charles Martel, had a chance to talk to each other and to like each other because they had similar interests. Charles Martel was not only a very gentle soul, apparently he had a good personality, according to Dante, but also he was destined to really good things. He was destined to become emperor of many territories. And here, Dante's personal dreams of this reawakening of the Roman Empire, we remember that he was dreaming already about Henry VII. We've seen that Henry VII coming from the north into Italy, and then unfortunately he died. In thinking about Charles Martel, Dante was making a parallel between the two characters, between the two leaders, and thinking that Charles Martel, as son of Charles II, had so much potential in terms of bringing together the empire and potentially improving the situation in Italy that was precipitating in disaster. As we've seen, there is a lot of music in Paradiso, and there is a lot of lyrical moments, but there's also a lot of dance. There's a lot of movement that goes in rhythm with the music. And here is a perfect example at verse 34. One circle and one circling and one thirst are ours as we revolve with the celestial princes. There is this sense of rhythmical dancing and rhythmical singing of the souls that is replicated and represented by d'un giro ed un girare ed una sete. Il giro is the movement. The girare is the rhythm. So even if it's the same root of the verb and it's the very similar concept, and this sete is the thirst, the desire for God. So they are dancing like this with the celestial princess. So this celestial princess, these souls are whirling with the principalities, who are the ones who move the heaven of Venus. And this is the principalities are really an order of angels. As we know, every heaven has a specific order of angels who are moving that heaven. And Dante already, in fact, in 1293, called out to these principalities, called out to these angels in the heaven of Venus, precisely when he said, Voi che ntendendo il terzo ciel movete. This was the beginning of a song, of a poem by Dante that he published in the Convivio, and that was already published when Charles Martel came to Florence. So there is a good reason why Dante is now, once Charles Martel stopped speaking, is now looking on the side to Beatrice, almost like, I don't know, like a dog who's looking at his master or somebody who's asking for permission. It's not only that, the reason is this quote from Dante's own work, in fact, that Charles Martel does here. He's quoting a poem that Dante wrote when he was kind of replacing the love for Beatrice with the love of Lady Philosophy. When Beatrice died, he wrote in his Convivio that he tried to survive and to try to find his own vitality in philosophy. And so this is, as we've seen from the end of Purgatorio, the main sense of guilt that he's feeling towards Beatrice. So there is a little bit of guilt as a feeling in this look on a side that Dante gives to Beatrice. So Dante asks Charles Martel who he is, who this soul is, and Charles replies. He says, Il mondo m'ebbe giù poco tempo. The world had me only for a short time. He died when he was 24. Probably for an illness, even if it's not completely sure, but he was only 24. And my happiness is hiding me. This is another beautiful, lovely image. Che mi raggia d'intorno e mi nasconde quasi animal di sua steta fasciato. He's comparing himself, Charles, to a little silkworm in a cocoon that is wrapped in his silk. This silk that is wrapped in is the light that keeps him hidden, or at least his face hidden. This is why Dante cannot see immediately or his face, and therefore he cannot recognize him immediately. Se io fossi giù stato, io ti mostrava di mio amor più oltre che le fronde. Very, very interesting verse. He's basically saying, if I had stayed below, if I had lived longer, I should have showed you more of my love than the leaves alone. So there is this repetition of love because we are in the heaven of Venus, and love and the word amor gets repeated a lot. But here in particular, Charles is saying to Dante, you, Dante, would have benefited a lot, not only yourself as a person, but the world if I had lived longer. And now he starts listing the territories that he would have inherited as a king. From his father's side, Charles Martel would have inherited the leadership over Provence, so this portion of modern France, and also the kingdom of Naples, which is current Calabria, Puglia, and a big portion of southern Italy, with the exclusion of Sicily, because we had a rebellion in Sicily in 1282 called the Sicilian Vespers, where Sicily was seeking independence from, and so it broke off from the Kingdom of Naples. And so it was not under the French anymore, but it went under the Spanish for a while. And so Charles would have inherited that remaining Kingdom of Naples province from the side of his father, Charles II. And from the side of his mother, he would have inherited Hungary. He mentions it here when he mentions the Danube, the river Danube. In fact, he does mention Sicily here on verse 68, e la bella Trinacria. It was called Trinacria and still is in a sense because of the 3 points, the 3 corners that the island of Sicily has. Trinacria, che si caliga, that covers itself with smoke, not because this mythical monster that was called Typheus, Dante says, which is kind of funny because he doesn't have any problem about talking about classical myths, but in this case, Charles talks about the nascente solfo, or the surging sulfur. So he prefers a much more scientific explanation for this smog and for this smoke that was coming out around Sicily, which was true. It was because the territory, the terrain is very volcanic around Sicily. Sicily would also be governed by a good king, by a good leadership, himself, Charles Martel, se mala signoria non avesse mosso Palermo a gridar mora mora. If an ill sovereignty, a bad leader, a bad king, had not provoked Palermo, the capital of Sicily, to cry out die die. There was a famous rebellious shout or rebellious chant that had been used in the Sicilian Vespers. Then Charles Martel talks about his brother Robert. He is the one that he's referring to when he talks about mio frate, or my brother, mio fratello. At this point we are still wondering, aside from the historic information, the historic importance of these events and this house of the Anjou, why should we care? Why should we care about what Charles Martel has to tell us in this canto? Dante finally is getting there in the next tercets when he starts to speak, and he asks a crucial question, and this question is at verse 91. He says, fatto m'hai lieto, e così mi fa chiaro, poiché parlando ad omitar m'hai mosso, come esser può di dolce seme amaro. He is asking him, again, a question that he has already asked before in Purgatorio, which is, how is it possible that from such a gentle seed, or a sweet seed, as you say, dolce seme, sweet seed, a harsh fruit derives? He's asking once again, he's really obsessed with this concept of people being born from very virtuous parents and being the opposite of virtuous. We actually remember that in Purgatorio, he's addressing this problem at least 3 times. Once in Canto 7 of Purgatorio, another time in Canto 14, and another time in Canto 20. And so, very legitimately, here we can ask ourselves, why is Dante asking this question again? Hasn't he already clarified it? Isn't this a dead horse that he keeps beating? Why is he bringing up again? And the answer, according to the majority of scholars, is that on one hand, it was an extremely important topic for him because it has to do with the balance between divine providence and free will. And also the fact that, on the other hand, in Paradiso, Dante is addressing all the little knots that were in his heart and in his mind regarding theology, and he gets deeper, he gets more articulate and more sophisticated for each one. And this is why the answer by Charles Martel will actually go deeper than what Dante has been able to do in Purgatorio when he addressed this topic already. The answer that Charles gives to this question goes deep and comes from St. Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle. No big surprise there. In particular, we have St. Thomas Aquinas quoted at verse 109, and Aristotle quoted after verse 113. Aristotle had written that nature never fails to provide what is necessary. And Dante repeats that, in fact, at verse 113. He says, I see it's impossible for nature to fall short of what is needed. Those are Aristotle's words, almost literal words. But the argument overall goes like this. God has not only created all that exists in the world, but is also created and creating the manner in which everything works. And the instruments that God uses for things to work perfectly on the earth are these stellar influences that are governed by angels. So if it wasn't for these stellar influences, there would be chaos. Then there is another reference to Aristotle, who said that man is a political animal, man is a social animal, a zoon politikon. That's what Aristotle wrote. And Dante, or Charles, asks Dante, would it be worse for human beings if human beings were not political in their nature? And Dante says, absolutely, yes, it would be worse. It's a good thing that human beings are political, are social in their nature. And can there be citizens if men below are not diverse, with diverse duties? No, there can't be, if what your master writes is accurate, your master being Aristotle. Now we're getting to the real center of the matter. These differences between all people are crucial for our society of people to work, to be effective, and to not collapse into chaos. So here is the conclusion. This is why somebody is born a Solon, somebody a Xerxes, Solon a legislator, Xerxes a general, Melchizedek a priest, and somebody else is born as Daedalus, therefore an artisan or an artist. Everybody is born with specific skills and specific talents. It's interesting how we might look at this in a smiling way and almost condescending way when we read this written by Dante in the Middle Ages. He thought there was the influx of the stars and the planets to make us as we are with our personalities. Today we know that a big part of that is driven by our DNA. Okay, but how much more do we really know? That's where Dante becomes and stays modern, even if he's talking about stellar influxes. I don't see a huge difference between that and what we know today, which is more, but certainly not enough to swipe away and dismiss what is talking about here from a theological point of view. So we have the celestial bodies who, while they are rotating, they are imprinting the individual characters, individual personalities in ourselves, in the mortal man, just like a seal on wax. This is probably Dante's favorite simile. We've heard this something like 15 times in the Divine Comedy. But this system does not care about different dynasties and houses. This is the point that Charles is making. This is why you can have different bad seed out of very virtuous men, because the system works looking at the entire humanity, and it doesn't distinguish family by family, group by group, or dynasty by dynasty. That's just how it works. So if we step back even more and we ask ourselves even more, why should we care? Why is this relevant to us? Why it's important to us, or should it touch us? We realize that it's very rare, especially in the Middle Ages, but it's very, very rare in general to find such an exaltation, such a celebration of human individuality, if you think about it. Here, Dante is saying that each one of us, with all of our deck of cards, bad cards, good cards that we received from our birth, are wanted as we are, as part of the plan of the providence, of divine providence. The final corollary that Charles wants to add, after having already answered pretty deeply Dante's question, is about the situation in life where somebody finds themselves doing or finds themselves in conditions to do something that they're not born to do. And this could be by mistake, or this could be by force. Somebody might be forced to become a priest, for example, even if they are born a warrior, or the opposite can be happening. So this goes very personal, and this can touch many of us today. How many of us are stuck, for example, in a day-to-day job that doesn't really reflect, or they feel doesn't reflect what they are, what they can bring to society? Because this is the point. It's not just to make yourself happy in an Epicurean way. The point is to be useful to society, to be useful to humanity in general. At your best, you should make of your life what you are born to do. If you're born to be a priest is the best way to help society work in the best way, because that's how you give the best of yourself. This is really the point. And oh my God, this really resonates, I think, with a lot of people, with myself for sure, and with other people today. This is another one of those cantos that honestly could be the origin of an entire university course in itself, of an entire book of reflections that are originated only by these terces, because they're so thick and packed with meaning. I'm just hoping that it was useful to listen to me for these 35 minutes. And thank you very much for listening. We'll speak again soon.